Rewritten! Epilogue!
They listened. They actually listened. He guessed that he shouldn't be so surprised about that, but despite everything that Miss Ragoose said, something in the back of his head was still paranoid about them thinking that he was being whiny. His family was actually really apologetic whenever he told them that they were being too protective, and instantly began to talk about what else they could do to take care of him while also not hovering over his shoulder around the clock. Eventually, they whipped up a new system, at least 2 people in the house at a time, who would check on him every hour or more. He could call them for help with whatever he needed help with, and every day they'd make sure to spend a good amount of time keeping him active with games or movies or books or just plain old conversations. But other than that, they'd mostly just leave him alone. They were always there to assist him or keep him company if he wanted it or needed it, but now he finally didn't have to deal with them constantly watching his every move. It was strangely freeing. There were days where he'd want them to stay with him for most of the day, but the days where he just wanted to be by himself, they'd let him be, other than frequent checkups to make sure that he was really alright and not just stuck in a depressive state of emptiness. That was the case sometimes, and when it was, they were always there to help him get through it. Stephen was so relieved that they weren't mad. Even though this didn't fix everything, it added a small layer of peace that he'd been lacking before. He found that he felt a lot more relaxed like this. Not perfect, but better. But that wasn't what he had to focus on right now. Right now, he was warping to Homeworld. The lightness of the warp pad stream was a lot nicer than he thought that it would be. During teleportation, there's no gravity and not a lot of heat. It made him weightless and cool, taking most of the heavy pressure off of his bones as he floated there in the pale blue column of light. It reminded him of swimming, but he didn't need to fight to breathe. There were 4 other gems coming with him. Pearl's elegant, thin figure was standing with a hand on his arm, keeping him steady, with Bismuth's bigger, burlier one on his other side. 2 lapis gems, one being Freckles and the other being the Crystal Gems lapis, were there too. They'd all wanted to come. Pearl and Bismuth were his guardians for today, and the 2 lazulis wanted to come see who they were going to see. He wished that he could stay in the warp stream forever, but Homeworld was incoming, and he tried to remind himself to land on his feet. In a bright flash, they appeared on the Homeworld warp, looking out at the gem's home planet. It was a lot like the last time he'd warped there, except a bit brighter. Many gems were bustling about outside now, chatting with each other and moving in between buildings. The graffiti from the Bluebird rebellion was gone, and the highways with the hover bubbles were speedy and full. Normally, he would be glad to see that things seemed to be more normal now, but instead he shrank back a step. Almost instantly at his arrival, at least 50 different eyes were on him. Gems who did double takes, gems who stopped in their tracks altogether, gems that gasped and tapped other gems while pointing. A sudden stillness swept through the crowd in a wave. The activity didn't stop, but it clearly shifted to carry the new weight of his presence. Timidness curled through him, and he shuffled closer to Pearl, looking down at his clawed feet. His scales were tingling, suddenly feeling too big for him, his tall horns sticking too far out of his head, his talons awkward and jarring, the quills cresting his back too spiky. He never knew that he could feel so self-conscious before. The bird-like gem cleared her throat, trying to pretend that nothing was wrong, leading him down the step of the Homeworld warp. He limped with her, her hand on his shoulder to support him, keeping his gaze down and away from all the other gazes that were surrounding him. Bismuth tried to help by blocking him with her bigger figure, tall and imposing but with a protective presence rather than a threatening one. Lapis was glaring out at the crowd challengingly, forcing some of them to pretend like they weren't interested in him, while Freckles just tried to grin awkwardly, waving. The public didn't know how to act around him. He wished that he didn't stand out so much. And, of course, here comes his gem, ready to save the day. The pink shine shot over his skin faster than he could beat it down. He yelped, staggering a bit, embarrassment prickling up his back. Great, now he practically had neon arrows pointing to him. It's okay, Stephen. They're all just curious. Pearl tried to reassure him as he twitched back towards the warp frozen there. Bismuth added, Homeworld hasn't heard much about their favorite diamond in a while. He tried to chuckle with her, but all that came was a whimper. Favorite diamond, yeah, right. Half of these gems had been tricked into trying to kill him only a few weeks ago. How many of these pedestrians had been cheering whenever he was lying between the barred gates, cracked and doomed? Traitors! Traitors! All of them! His gem splintered angrily at this, so loud in his mind that it sounded almost audible. He put a hand to his head, wincing at the headache. Shh, it's okay. They just made a mistake. He thought back to it. It was my fault they did that. His gem didn't like to think about that fight. It felt like it had failed him. The one time he really needed it to defend him, it had let him push their guard down. And then it had been cracked, becoming useless, leaving him to die. The glow got worse. It hurt to walk, but it hurt more to stand there any longer. Whispers, not too subtle to miss, were exchanged around him. Yeesh, look at those scars. He's doing the glowing thing again. What do you think he's here for? Stephen just kept his head down and suffered through the spotlight shine until the tall palace walls rose up to claim him. He was only able to really breathe whenever they made it inside. There were less gems, most of the ones in the palace there for work. The only gems that they passed were simply traveling to different rooms. They still stared, but at least it was just one or two at a time. The pink glow slowly faded, without the crowd of watching eyes pressing in on him. As they walked along, navigating the thin, sparkling halls and clean, tiled floors, Stephen picked up on the worry from the others. Pearl's hand was fidgeting with the ends of his shirt, holding him close as they walked. Bismuth was tense, though she tried to joke a bit to help. Stephen didn't remember the joke. Freckles was squeezing her fingers together, tripping every few meters on nothing. Lapis was stiff and rigid, every inch of her ready for action. Everyone was nervous about this trip, not just Stephen. The people that they were going to visit probably wouldn't be very happy to see them. He was almost glad as the anxious thoughts began to be stuffed with the pains building him up. As always, he was getting more and more sore the farther that they walked. He'd begun to recover from what he'd done to get to Jasper's grave, but his body still didn't like moving around this much. They were stopping for more and more frequent breaks until eventually he told them that he couldn't keep going. That was already worked into their plan. They knew that Stephen could get some exercise from this, but certainly couldn't walk all the way through the palace to where they had to be. Even though Pearl or the lazulis could probably lift him if they tried, Bismuth was far taller and stronger, so she ended up being the one to carry him. They continued after that interruption, with Pearl still leading the way. When they drew closer, she began to pipe up, clearing away some of the quiet of the echoing halls. I believe the holding cells should be in the same place since I worked here. If we need to, we can go and ask the diamonds for directions, but I think I can bring us there for now. The only reason he wasn't being swarmed by diamonds right now was because Stephen hadn't wanted to tell them that he was coming. He wanted this to be about the flock of jailbirds, not the diamonds. And besides, he had no idea what he would even say if he ran into White Diamond. He knew what Miss Ragoose had told him to say, but the topic still made him nervous, and he didn't want to divide his attention into two things right now. He just wanted to fix this first before dealing with White. Eventually, they reached their destination. The door that was blocking it reached the ceiling, thick and solid, gleaming with reinforcements. Nothing was getting through that. Pearl had drifted over to the side of the door, where the control panel was. She pointed to it and said, "Stephen, if you could try." He nodded, and Bismuth set him down carefully, letting his legs have time to adjust to standing again before lifting her broad hand from his shoulders. Stephen approached the panel, praying that it would work. Normally, he'd have access to every part of the palace, being a diamond, but what if it didn't recognize him? His hands were paws, the complete wrong size and shape, disproportionate talons curving long beyond where his fingers would have ended, his thumb a dew-claw-like structure several inches down his arm from where it should be. The pads of skin were leathery and rough, and the scales covering the backs of his knuckles and coating his arm up to his elbow were sharp like broken seashells. Stephen knew that even if they couldn't get in with him, they could still go get the diamonds, but that would mean inevitably talking to her, so he just hoped that this would work. Stephen didn't let himself hesitate any longer. He lifted his right paw and pressed it under the panel, holding his breath, watching it glow as it scanned him. There was a moment of pause where the computer processed what it saw, as if it was confused. But after that moment passed, it dinged in agreement, and the door began to unlock with several large clanks. Stephen released his breath, taking his paw away again, seeing Pearl, Bismuth, and the two lazulis smiling at his success. No uncomfortable diamond talk for him. He looked up at the massive door as something in the front rotated and clicked to the side, unlocking before popping up and then beginning to slide into the walls. The whole process was strangely jerky and grinding, like it hadn't done this in a long time. It scraped along the floor, dragging itself out of the way, until it disappeared. The hallway revealed beyond the door was long and still. The rest of the palace was adorned with intricate designs in the walls, chandeliers, and other decorative features, but this hallway had none of those things. It was just a straight shot to the next door, bare and strangely eerie. The stale air stuck to his tongue. He felt a small drop of dread enter him, but it wasn't enough for his gem to step in. It was fine. They weren't going to be able to hurt him. "Do you want me to keep carrying you?" Bismuth asked, taking him out of it. No, he said after considering it. I can make it. I want to talk to them without looking like I'm dying." Bismuth nodded. "That seems good. Don't want them to think they've scared you." Stephen swallowed and then continued on down the hallway, helped by Pearl and Bismuth while being tailed by the two lazulis. The walk seemed to take less time than he would have liked. Even whenever they made it to the second door, he felt like he didn't have enough space to collect himself. Still, he limped over to the control pad, pressing his paw onto it again. It thought for a second, and then confirmed with another ding, shuttering the big old door out of the way. As it let them through, Stephen thought that he heard whispers trailing away quickly, somebody hushing someone else. The Diamond's prison wasn't very large at all. Probably because, when it was built, they didn't take many prisoners. There were about 10 cells, 5 on each side of the room. The room itself was large and squat, having no windows or other doors. A sheen of an electric yellow force field was over each of the cells, zapping with its current, the panels next to each of them connected to a wire that led to the ceiling into all the other cells, like a vein. He recognized those force fields and suppressed a shudder of a bad memory. He'd encountered them whenever Jasper had first come to Earth and kidnapped him and his family to take back to Yellow Diamond. His holding cell had a field over it, but he'd been able to get through because he was half human. Those force fields could keep a gem's light-composed form inside by destabilizing them whenever they tried to pass through, but it couldn't stop Stephen's organic form. Instead of getting swamped by the memories of their escape from the prison, Stephen tried to focus outwards on his other senses. It smelled like dust. The only light came from the cell's force fields. No sounds came to him. Nervous but trying not to show it, he began to step forwards uneasily, leaning to peer inside the first cell. And then, Bluebird lunged towards him with a furious shriek, razor-sharp icy scabbards in each hand, wings flaring out behind her as her splotchy face contorted into an expression of rage, the gems in her eye and under it gleaming with vengeance. Stephen screamed and reeled back, his gem flaring with light, his shield snapping up to protect him. A horrible flash shot through his vision like a bullet, her glittering sword cutting up towards his gem, breaking him almost in two, stamping the magic out of him until he was a helpless pile of agony on the floor. No, that was just a memory, it wasn't real. Bluebird's real-life frozen blades sliced down towards him, but they ended up sending up sparks of yellow light, blocked by the force field. The force field. Stephen panted heavily on the floor, shaking and clutching at the gem in his belly, disoriented. The cold blade leaping upwards, aiming for the kill, rendering his gem useless. He grimaced, pushing the memory away and trying to ground his mind as it attempted to fly away from him. He stared down at himself. He wasn't cracked. She hadn't gotten to him. He was safe. He was fine. He looked back up at her. Bluebird was still inside of her cell, the icy scabbard she held grating against the force field as she leaned her weight into it, zaps of electricity refusing to give in, as if she was hoping that she could cut right through. She was enraged, her lips snarled, her eyes scowling. But the cell's wall held, and she slowly lowered the weapons again, letting them fall back to her sides as she huffed in frustration. The irritation only lasted for a moment before she saw how much she'd scared him. The annoyingly familiar smirk appeared on her splotchy face, and Bluebird chuckled smugly. Boo. Gotcha. The other gems had rushed over to Stephen to help him up, asking him if he was okay. Stephen nodded with a grimace. The fall had sent aches up his spine, but he was determined to not show it in front of Bluebird. He gradually and shakily made it to his feet, leaning against Bismuth's solid support, thanking her quietly. Tremors of fear still crawled through him. He was still glowing. His gem was seething. He put his hand over it, feeling the prickle of ghost pains rising. The last time they'd met, Bluebird had tried to shatter him, and had almost succeeded if it wasn't for Kunzite. "We all heard what you said, you shattering traitor!" He jerked back at a flash of a non-existent blade, trying to shake off the violent memory once more as it tried to jump him again. She'd cracked him, the very first time that had ever happened. Stephen could feel his gem's feelings clearly. That fight had made all of this protective stuff way worse. He told it to back down, it listened, and they'd almost died because of it. It believed that he should have shattered Bluebird. It was never going to let that happen again. Stephen tried to calm down, focusing on the yellow force field between them. Bluebird couldn't hurt him, and she never would ever again. She'd either decide to live peacefully or rot in this cell for the rest of her eternal life. That was what he was here for. Bluebird, Curly, and Holly Blue Agate had been captured and imprisoned here by Lars's crew whenever Stephen's family had gone out with Nephrite to uncorrupt his monster. The homeworld residents who had sided with the 3 blue gems quickly realized the mistake and backed down once everything was explained, but Bluebird, Curly, and Holly Blue Agate hadn't given up, resulting in, well, this. He wanted to remind himself of why he was here at all. Stephen shoved the horrible memories away, trying to focus on the present. He was here to save her from this fate, whether she wanted him to or not. He stared around at the other cells, spotting the 2 other gems in separate ones across from Bluebird's. Curly's dark blue, long-dressed form of grouchy stubbornness, and Holly Blue Agate self-important, towering figure of demanding authority. They hadn't tried to scare him like Bluebird, but they didn't warn him either. He tried to put that behind him. Willing himself to straighten up and look as unfazed as possible, Stephen cleared his throat and began. Okay, Bluebird, Curly, Holly, I want to help you all. If by help you mean turn me into a mindless goody-two-shoes Stephen worshipper, then the answer is no, Bluebird sassed. Stephen sighed. This would be the ultimate test of patience for him. Hey, shut your mouth, gravel-hole, Bismuth growled defensively. He's your only chance at ever leaving this cell. You're lucky he's against shattering, otherwise you'd be grinded into a pile of dust right now. What, so I'm supposed to owe him because he didn't kill me? Bluebird crossed her arms. No, you should at least just show some respect. Stephen stepped in between them, trying to stop this before it became an argument. No, wait, just quiet for a second, no fighting. Bismuth backed up, and Bluebird silently curled her nose at her from behind the yellow force field. He decided to come back to Bluebird later, turning instead to Curly and Holly, who hadn't said a word since he walked in. What about you two? He attempted. Bluebird doesn't have to speak for you. You can get out of this, if we can just agree. He searched their faces as the 2 gems thought about it. Curly seemed to be mostly embarrassed and frustrated, while Holly seemed to be more on the sad and hopeless side of things. They weren't a spitting ball of rage like Bluebird, who was simultaneously trying to trigger a flashback, so that was a good sign. Holly was the first to speak. I don't understand, she cried. Everything was fine until you came around. The human zoo has never been more chaotic. The diamonds have ignored all my requests for new orders. I don't know what else to do. You ruined everything, Stephen. My position means nothing. The diamonds are obsessed with you. They don't care about the authority at all. Why do things have to change so much? Why do you have to mess everything up? The messing everything up part of what she was referring to was how he'd taken Homeworld out of the diamond's tyrannical rule. Holly Blue Agate used to be a high-ranking gem, but not anymore. If she wanted to be high-ranking, she had to earn it, and she didn't feel like putting forward the effort into earning it. He'd worked hard for many long years to make everyone peaceful and to reconstruct their entire society, and Holly still wasn't satisfied with it because she wasn't automatically important anymore. You can't just expect stuff to fall into your lap, he began, the anger twisting through him. Pearl's thin hand tightened over his spiky shoulder. He knew what message she wanted to send him. Keep your head, think about what you're going to say, don't lash out, compromise. He had to try. Stephen took in a deep breath, counting. When he was ready, he tried again. Look, Holly, I know all this new stuff is weird. You've probably lived for centuries doing one thing, and now that it's gone, you don't know what to do without it. But I assure you, if you just get off your... Stephen paused, stifling it again, and instead smoothing his sentence into, you receive as much as you give, okay? If you want to be high-ranking, you'll have to earn it. But even if you don't want to do that, you can still find another purpose at Little Homeschool. That's kind of the whole point. Holly blinked at him for a moment, then looked past him as Bluebird protested. But what about you, huh? He turned around to face her, her one-eyed gaze challenging. You were born a diamond. I was born an aquamarine and a ruby. Why do you get to be royal and I get to be criminal? Shouldn't you have earned it too? Stephen felt unbridled outrage rearing up in him, his gem glowing hotter. Where do you think all these scars came from? He snapped, hurtling headfirst into a rant. Why do you think I corrupted? Because I had a bad day? No! It's because I risked my neck every day for years and years just to save all of you! Don't tell me that I didn't earn it! His voice was raising, his skin was getting brighter. They were all backing away anxiously, all except for Pearl, who reached forwards again, trying to stop him. Stephen, careful! She pleaded in a whisper. He looked at her, jumping at her scared expression, staring around and seeing that everyone else wore the same one, all except for Bluebird, who was grinning toothfully. No, he was failing, Stephen stopped everything in its tracks, a paw on his head as he struggled to bring his gem down out of the storm that was building around him. Calm down, please, we're not supposed to be yelling, he thought to it. She's ungrateful. I can make her say sorry. I can help you, his gem muttered in his head. Please don't. She just wants to antagonize us. We can't let her win, Stephen said. We want to compromise. We can do this. We just need to stay calm. His gem's glow steadily decreased, but it didn't go away completely. When he flickered his eyes back open, he was able to focus back on Holly, who still seemed wary as if she wasn't entirely sure that he was safe to be around. "Sorry, I didn't mean to yell," Stephen apologized. "But please, just listen to me, all of you. This new way of life isn't the end of the world, okay? I know it looks scary, but I can make it be not as scary if you just let me help you." There was another longer silence. Bluebird scoffed, which was expected, but he felt a small shimmer of hope whenever he saw the contemplative look on Holly's face. Curly seemed to be watching Lapis and Freckles closely, indecisive and still quite embarrassed. He looked over at the gold-flecked lazuli and saw that Freckles had been staring at her old partner wistfully, sadly. They used to work together, but Freckles had chosen to be good and Curly had stubbornly refused to become soft. He still knew that they missed each other, though. Maybe he could get through to Curly like that. He exchanged a glance with Freckles, and she seemed to have the same idea. She'd definitely want to attempt to sway her to her side, at the very least. So Stephen stepped back to let her do her thing. The gold-dotted lazuli strode towards her old friend, reaching forwards but not touching the fizzing yellow force field. "Come on, Lapis," Freckles said quietly. "Just give this up. It's not so bad, trust me. I don't want to leave you in here." "I don't want to stay here either." Curly glanced down at her bare feet, sighing. "But this is dumb. I'd rather be me in here instead of some weird flower-smelling pebble out there." She gave a sideways look to the crystal gem's Lapis, then glanced away as if flustered. Their Lapis was glaring at her sternly, approaching the force field too. "Look, buddy, this weird flower-smelling pebble can kick your rear any day." The crystal gem's Lapis put her hands on her hips. "And the last time I checked, I'm the one on the free side of the force field." Curly squirmed around, not able to meet her gaze. I don't get it," she finally stomped, as if she'd made it to her limit. You're so powerful, you're so incredible, you're the most amazing lazuli gem I've ever seen before, but you're with him?" She threw a hand in his direction. "How could any self-respecting lazuli give up their terraforming life?" Curly continued. "It's undignified. Well, it's supposed to be undignified, but you're so... She lowered her chin again, her face flushing a deep indigo blue. "How do you do it?" Shaking her head, the gold-flecked Lapis stepped as close as she could get to the force field, saying, "You just need to let go of your pride. It can't be more important than your life, right? I want you to be with me again, and you clearly want to learn more from Lapis." She gestured to the crystal gem's lazuli. "If she can find dignity in this peaceful life, you can too. Please, just be logical. I want you to be happy." Stephen stayed quiet and watched as Curly thought deeply about what her friend was saying. He spotted Holly bearing a similar contemplative look, even catching a hint of reconsidering from Bluebird. He prayed in his head that Curly would see sense in this. Finally, Curly dragged a hand down her face, staring back up at the two lazulis. She took in a breath and said, "I don't want to die here. I'm proud, but I'm not stupid."
So you'll be nice?
Freckles bounced up, clapping in ecstatic. Curly almost gagged, but she forced a nod. "Yes, fine, I'll try it out." Her eyes were on the crystal gem's Lapis the whole time, admiring and hopeful. Holly seemed to break through the station at this point, desperate to catch the train in time before it left, yelling, "I'll surrender too!" She paced back and forth, her white heels clicking on the metal floor. I'll be good. I'll follow all your rules. I just want another chance." She glanced at him, stopping abruptly. "If a human hybrid can earn it, I'll prove I can too." A bubbly relief passed through him before tiredness sank back. He was just relieved that they'd listened. He was ready to go home. "Thank you, both of you," he sighed, reaching towards the control panels next to their cells. He unlocked both of them with a touch of his paw, the zapping yellow force field cutting off. The two blue gems stepped out of their prisons, the tension loosening out of them after they were free. Curly twitched towards Freckles, then stepped back. Freckles beamed and said, "Come here," with her arms out. Curly ignored her at first, pursing her lips, but Freckles wasn't waiting any longer, leaping forwards and tugging her into a giggly hug. When Curly managed to pry herself off of her, her eyes were back on the crystal gem's Lapis, who was watching her thoughtfully. Finally, their Lapis raised up a hand, and Curly took it, rapidly shaking it up and down before letting it go with a flustered shuffle to her feet, blushing even deeper. He looked over and saw that Holly Blue Agate and Pearl seemed to be having a competitive staring contest. He remembered the last time they'd met. Oh dear. Pearl's mouth perked up a little, and she held out a hand for Holly too. Holly wrinkled her nose, but she let out a breath at Bismuth's hard stare. She shook her smaller hand quickly. That will be all, Pearl whispered, patting Holly on the shoulder. Stephen snorted, but silently pleaded for Pearl to not irritate her too much. And then, just as they began to soak in their triumph, there was a screechy voice from behind them.
Guys, what the hell?
Oh, right. Everyone turned around to see Bluebird still standing in her cell, fuming. This time, her tantrum was aimed at Curly and Holly as she jabbed a finger towards them, yelling, "You were supposed to attack him once he let you out! What about the plan?" Bismuth, Lapis, and Pearl suddenly jumped to form a protective circle around Stephen, but Curly and Holly didn't make a move at all, only raising their hands in submission.
Well, Bluebird raised her eyebrows, gesturing pointedly to Stephen. If you're not going to kill him, let me out so I can.
Curly and Holly looked to each other, then back to her, shaking their heads. Yeah, about that, Curly began. I wasn't lying. I really do want to go good. Holly nodded and said, "It's time I earn my place. If I'm getting a second chance, I'm taking it." "Idiots, both of you!" Bluebird spat. "You don't have to listen to him! He just wants to control you! Don't you remember how backwards he's made the Diamond Authority?" Curly shrugged. If backwards means not getting shattered, I'm all for it." Holly crossed her arms across her chest. "And if we don't have to listen to him, why do we have to listen to you?" Bluebird stared at her, teeth gritted together, before hissing in frustration, beginning to pace back and forth with her 4 spidery legs pattering over the metallic floor. "Stupid, stupid, stupid!" she grumbled. Bluebird's secret plan was being foiled right in front of her eyes. Though a bit of betrayal dropped through him at the idea that she'd made a plan with them to stab him in the back, he was proud of Curly and Holly for not going through with it. But Bluebird had tried to do it again. Just like before, Bluebird had counted on his mercy to get the chance to strike. The only reason he wasn't shattered right now was because she'd been the bad cop in this little scheme, and hadn't gotten the chance to follow through with it. His gem's fury pressed up through the back of his skull, shouting angrily inside of his head so loud that it made a flashing headache twinge through him again. He grimaced, closing his eyes and rubbing a palm into his forehead to try and ease the throbbing as his gem's voice rang in his ears. "How dare she! Stephen, she can't be trusted! She knows how to get to you! She's a dangerous traitor! Let me finish the job!" The glow intensified, the heat wafting from him like a fire. "Oh no, stop, please," he groaned, before remembering to not voice the pains, instead thinking to it, "Please, calm down, it's okay, she's not dangerous inside of the cell. We're okay, I promise, please don't attack her, I want to give her a second chance." His gem's thoughts made a sound that must have been a sigh, before echoing to him, "You're too nice. You're too violent," Stephen thought back. "Please, just let it down a little. She can't do anything to us with the force field still up." His gem muddled that idea around for a bit, getting back to him with, "Fine, but I won't let you get killed." The glow of his skin shed away, back to its usual rhythmic hum. Not gone, just not about to fire off a death laser. He was suddenly aware that Pearl, Bismuth, and Lapis were all holding him up like they were afraid of him collapsing, their worried and slightly freaked out faces surrounding him like trees in a forest. "Stephen? Hello?" Lapis was waving a hand in front of him. "Are you there?" Stephen blinked, trying to focus back to reality. Yeah, sorry, He must have spaced out while talking to his gem. He hoped that he didn't scare them too much. It happened sometimes during deeper conversations with it. The others had told him, whenever he did that it was really creepy. Amethyst described it as being like as if he were possessed. His eyes would apparently roll back and he'd start muttering random things, not responding to anybody. It was all just because he was turning around in his mind to face his gem rather than the outside world, but it still unsettled his family whenever it happened in front of them. "What on homeworld was that?" Bluebird's yelp suddenly shocked him back out of his thoughts. "How can you all listen to him? He's insane! Look at him!" Stephen shriveled away from her, his paws curling closer to him. No, I'm not insane. I was just talking to my gem." "If you're not insane, why did you corrupt, huh?" Bluebird questioned him further. "You didn't get blasted by the diamonds. You did that all by yourself." Stephen shook his head, scrambling to explain. It was a lot of different things, but I'm not insane. I'm trying to fix them. Bluebird barked a laugh. "You're trying to fix them? Well, it's obviously not working. Just look at those scars. Goodness, I've never seen that many on one gem before. I'd say that they're permanent, but whatever. You can keep lying to yourself if it makes you feel better." His scales prickled over his skin, trapping him like hardening concrete. The constant pain that came with them suddenly became suffocating, hot, heavy. He was never going to escape them. A voice, Lapis, came through to him from the avalanche of incoming panic. "Stephen, it's okay. Don't listen to her. She's just trying to mess with you." Bismuth and Pearl were snapping some sort of retort at Bluebird as she giggled mischievously. He could recognize that look in her eye. He knew that she wanted him to react like this. But her words had sounded more real to him than Miss Ragoose's. Stephen screwed his eyes shut tight, wrestling against the fear, trying not to fall into it. That was what Bluebird wanted. He couldn't look brittle in front of her. He had to show her that he wasn't as broken as he really was. He couldn't let her know that she was getting to him, that he had weaknesses. Stephen tried his best to clear away the clouds fogging up his ears, glaring back at Bluebird with all the courage that he could muster, saying, "Stop changing the subject. I'm trying to help you here. Can't we just talk?" "Yeah, since that worked so well last time," Bluebird's lips smirked. He moved a paw over his gem uneasily, and then tried to drop it before she saw. "Is that a threat?" His gem was raising its attention in his head. He tried to push it away with the thought that she couldn't make threats in her position. "I'm sure we can find a compromise," he started. "All right, Psycho, what other cheery fairy tale nonsense you got for me?" Bluebird leaned back against the wall, bored. Stephen bit back the irritation, counting to 10 again and reminding himself to be calm before he answered. "Look, you want to be free, and I don't want you to wreak havoc," he started slowly. "I'm sure you can find some other purpose in life other than hating me. There's so many other things to do on Earth. You can enroll in little homeschool and figure out what you like to do." "Why should we have to listen to you?" Bluebird scoffed. "Just because you're a diamond? There's 4 diamonds, in case you haven't noticed, and you're the littlest. Why should all of Homeworld change just because you say so? Your mother never had that power." She straightened up importantly and snarled savagely at him. "I think she gave her authority up whenever she decided to abandon us and hide on Earth so she could get plowed by that disgusting human you call my dad." Stephen was so taken aback he did nothing but stare at her, open-mouthed, for a good few seconds. "What, you gonna cry?" Bluebird taunted. "Is Widow Bluebird being too mean for you?" Everyone else was looking at him like they were waiting for orders. His first reaction was to grab her by the throat and break her gems, but he was luckily able to knock that urge out before it set in. He could see the challenging grin plastered onto her splotchy face. She wanted him to act out badly, and she was testing for a new sore spot to see if it worked. She knew that his dad was important to him. She'd already threatened him before whenever they first met. So, instead of giving her the satisfaction, he breathed in and out, trying to count to 10 for the 100th time, willing himself to douse the flames. "Okay, we're starting over," Stephen finally said, standing stiffly. "Hi, I'm Stephen." "I must be pretty terrifying," Bluebird rolled on, ignoring him. "You glow when you're scared, don't you? You haven't stopped glowing since you walked in this room." Stephen froze up again, caught off guard. He stammered. The patchy permafusion continued. "Did our little fight stick with you? Did I spook you? Does Big Bad Bluebird keep you up at night?" He hated to admit it to himself, but she was right. Countless bad dreams of his gem being cracked by her were sprinkled around the sea of nightmares that he had to swim in every night. But he couldn't let her know that. No, it's not that. I'm just..." Bluebird suddenly pounced towards him, her icy scabbards unsheathing from the gem in her eye, shrieking in defiance. Stephen was incinerated with terror at the sight, horrible flashes of their fight burning in his retinas, falling back away from her. Her weapon sliced upwards at his underbelly, splitting a horrible fracture through his gem's glass surface, the crowd bursting into a cheer of elation. No, she didn't. She couldn't anymore. He was safe. Her real-life blades jammed into the force field, not able to get through even a little, sparks flying at their jagged attempts. But even though she hadn't touched him, Stephen was now sent spiraling into another panic. His gem was screeching so loudly in his head that it blasted away almost every other thought, scorching him with pain. "Attack! Attack! Kill! Traitor! Danger! He couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in on him. He was dying. He knew he was dying. Stephen! Pearl's voice was so far from him, being thrown away and drowned out by the sound of the crowd's cheering. "You're okay! Look at me! You're okay!" He tried to call out to her, but couldn't tell if his voice was making it past the noise. He felt her thinner hand seize his paw, rubbing the pale thumb on the inside of his palm. He held on desperately, knowing that she was trying to ground him. He wanted to focus on Pearl, but that was about as hard as ignoring someone who was yelling in his face. Still, he pushed back at the invading memory as hard as he could, zoning in everything that he had within his control into the shape and texture of her hand, using it as a hooking line to follow back to safety. It began to fade away. The metallic floor became a little more real below him. The glow of the force field that separated him from the threat became a little more solid. Just barely, just enough for him to fix the most dangerous part of this. "It's okay, she can't get to us, there's a field," he thought back to his gem, pulling it down from its warning bell tower. His vision was clearing gradually, enough for him to see what had happened. He'd been caught by Bismuth, with Pearl holding on to him securely. Lapis was yelling angrily at Bluebird, while Holly stayed out of the way. Curly and Freckles were close together, confused at what was happening. Stephen was trembling from head to toe as he tried to get his feet under himself again, wanting to recover as fast as possible in front of Bluebird. He could see the splotchy permafusion, laughing wildly at him from inside of her cell, ignoring Lapis's furious hollers, triumph gleaming in her gems. He'd panicked. He'd shown her that he was scared. And now she was latching onto that. "Why do you think you could boss us around?" Bluebird giggled, her toothy grin curling unpleasantly onto her cheeks. "You're more fragile than ever. I just need to step in your direction and you flinch." Stephen felt too shaky to deal with this anymore. His gem still hadn't backed down all the way. It was boiling in the back of his head, trying to barge in on his thoughts. "Bluebird, please, stop it!" he begged, not wanting her to make it bad enough for him to not be able to stop his gem anymore. "Or what?" she challenged, stomping one of her 4 feet. "You'll kill me? You'll break me into a million pieces? I thought you were better than that, Steven Universe!" The pressure was building. His gem was screaming at him to shut her up. "Please," he whimpered. "You'll never do it again." Bluebird's confidence was shadowed and strong, powered by a knowledge that she shouldn't have ever gotten her grubby hands on. "I know you won't. That's what makes you weaker than me. It doesn't matter what anybody does to you. You'll always let them go." She was right. She was so right that it hurt. His gem hated it more than anything else in the world. She chortled again in a way that made his gem burn even brighter, and slithered. "You think forgiveness makes you strong. It only makes you weak." That was it. His gem couldn't take it anymore. It never wanted to show weakness to her ever again. But Stephen restrained it before it lunged forwards in its fury, begging for it to not let her control them. "Be calm, compromise, don't lash out, don't let her get to you." He shook from the effort, but he managed to keep it down, counting from 1 to 10 as he refined his anger into a plan. Stephen didn't need to attack her. He just needed to show her exactly what she was encouraging him to do. So, eerily expressionless, Stephen got up and stepped forwards. The yellow force field didn't work on him, as it never has before. Stephen calmly walked right through the cell's field with no more than a tickle, looming over her like a skyscraper, radiating a powerful stillness as he glared down at her tiny, stocky figure. Bluebird's face snapped into one of pure horror, stepping back. She hadn't known that he could get through the force field. There was no longer an impenetrable wall of glass between her and the lion. He didn't need to do anything more. He only had to stand there for 2 seconds before she broke apart. The permafusion shone, her body disappearing into a sheen of white light, melting apart into her separate halves. Aquamarine's little, neatly suited form fell away from Eyeball's compact, squarish one. They weren't able to hold it together anymore. Immediately, Eyeball threw her hands up to guard her face where her gem was embedded into her eye, squealing, No, please, I surrender, I surrender!" Aquamarine stood up, which wasn't as intimidating as it should be, seeing as she was only 1 foot tall. She started yapping like a chihuahua at her partner. "Ruby, get over here! What are you doing?" Eyeball shot back at her, outraged. "What am I doing? What are you doing? This is crazy! He freaking shattered Jasper! I'm not dying for this crap!" Aquamarine snapped. "I thought we were in this together! Look how well we were doing! We set him off 3 times! You ruined it, you idiotic foot soldier!" Eyeball huffed in frustration. It's always me, huh? It's always me who gets the blame." Aquamarine nodded vigorously. "Yes, because you're always the one who does something dumb! Honestly, I should expect that from a Ruby. What? Hey!" Stephen watched as the 2 halves of Bluebird solved his problem for him, just like last time. Bluebird was only able to coordinate if they were focused on hating him. Once they were more focused on hating each other in their forced relationship, Their fusion fell apart.
This is all your fault!
Just shut up
No,
already!
no, you shut
Stop.
up! I can't believe I have to fuse
Stop
with someone
saying
this
that
dull.
already! Stop saying
No,
that already!
no,
Why do
listen
I
to
even
me,
put
idiot.
up with
You better
It's always
stop.
just
You're
yap,
making
yap,
this
yap,
look
yap,
so
yap, Ruby do
stupid.
this, Ruby do that!
Seriously, can
all
your tiny
day!
processing unit even begin
Tiny?
to comprehend
I'll
how
show you,
stupid
Tiny,
you're
you
being
little
right
squeaky
now.
mosquito!
Before the argument advanced much further, Eyeball stood up, looking as if she'd catch fire at this point, which was quite possible seeing as if she was a Ruby, a fire-wielding gem. She stomped her foot and yelled,
You know what? Screw this! I'm done! I'm out! You're always complaining about me and your voice is annoying and I hate you!
I thought we were supposed to hate him! Aquamarine pointed a pin-sized finger to Steven, her fury not nearly as intimidating whenever she looked like a literal fairy. We're supposed to overthrow him! Eyeball threw her arms up, her feet sizzling with smoke.
What's the point? What's the end goal here? Do you really think we can turn Homeworld around to how it used to be all by ourselves? No! So we better shape up and try to fit into our new lives. If we don't like it, we deal with it. It's better than being shards.
Aquamarine stepped back a little, glaring fiercely as Eyeball moved to stand closer to Steven, crossing her arms. The tiny blue gem couldn't do anything to get her back like this. Aquamarines had no natural weapons, and even though she kept apparently acting superior to Eyeball, she depended on the Ruby's skill in battle. Stupid hooligan, Aquamarine hissed. You keep calling me that, but to be honest, I'm starting to think I'm smarter than you, Eyeball growled back at her, especially if I'm the one who's going to walk out of this cell. Aquamarine blinked in realization. Steven exchanged glances at the short red gem, smiling at her gratefully as Eyeball nodded stiffly. He held up his arm, and both of them walked back out of the force field. The current was blocked enough for Eyeball to pass through if she hid underneath his paw. Before Aquamarine could try to follow her, they'd made it out to the other side, free from the prison again. 3 out of 4. Thank you, Ruby. You made the right choice. Steven offered her a smile. She accepted it and returned it with one of her own. I can't believe you! Aquamarine's screechy voice brought everyone's attention back to the tiny fairy-like gem. How can you agree to go with him? He's a mushy pushover! Everyone in his stupid society is all soft and lovey-dovey. You can't want to be that! Eyeball rolled her eye and said, I know, it's irritating, but at least it's not an eternity in prison. Steven didn't really know how to feel about that.
I demand for things to change! Aquamarine stomped her little foot in a fit. I am not leaving with you unless things go back to the way they were!
Despair opened up in him. This was hopeless. He was never going to convince Aquamarine to be good. He didn't want to leave her. That was something that he hadn't really realized until now. He'd walked in here already subconsciously believing that he was going to come out with 4 new members of Little Homeschool. But now, one of them was refusing, and there was seemingly no way to sway her. What could he do now? If he couldn't fix her... I can help, his gem whispered in his ear. At first, he tried to push it away, thinking that it wanted to punch her again, but his gem quickly added, No, really, I have an idea. A few beats later, Steven straightened up, looking down onto her scowling face. He shrugged and replied, Okay. He turned, the glow disappearing from his skin like it was never there. He waved to the others and said, Come on, we're done here. What? Aquamarine stammered. I said we're done, Steven repeated. You don't want to leave, so you're not gonna. Aquamarine swallowed. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, you're not, Steven nodded to agree, his back to her as he limped to the exit. The crowd of gems began to shuffle out the door with him. They filtered into the hallway one by one until the prison was empty. Steven moved to the side of the door where the panel was, slowly hovering his paw over it before placing it down. Bye, he waved at the little fairy blue gem, cold and blank. May we never meet again. The heavy metal door beeped and shut with a loud final clank, locking with several rebounding clicks. Everyone was silent for a few moments. Steven crossed his arms, watching the door. Nothing yet. Bismuth opened her mouth, but he held up a hand to signal her to be quiet. Any second now.
Wait, please, come back!
Aquamarine's muffled cries made a relieved sigh escape him. A bit of intimidation did the trick, just like whenever he stepped through the force field. Steven opened the door again, waiting until it scraped out of the way. He called innocently, What was that? There was nothing from her cell for a while before a frustrated voice grumbled, I said come back. Now. Stephen re-entered the room, trying to wipe away any amount of relief he might still be holding. He limped in front of her cell and saw that Aquamarine was so close to the force field that she was in danger of being zapped by it. Her glare was sharp enough to cut paper. Through gritted teeth, she told him, "I don't want to die here, but I don't want to live in your dumb new homeworld. I have an idea for a truce." Stephen kept the eagerness out of his voice as he said, "All right." Aquamarine told him, "You let me out, and I'll fly away, hopefully far enough away to where I never have to see your face again. I won't try to kill you anymore, but I'm not enrolling in your stupid school." He wasn't expecting that. He'd been sort of hoping that she would decide to live peacefully like Eyeball, but was this really the only option for her? "Are you sure?" Stephen said. "I'm sure that we could find a place for you." Aquamarine made a face and said, "No, absolutely not. This might be the life for you, but not for me. I want to explore planets again, far away from you, with nobody to tell me what to do." Stephen was almost about to suggest something else, but the little fairy blue gem stopped him. "Don't. This is the only thing I'll agree to." He lowered his gaze. He really wanted to try and keep talking, to maybe figure something else out. But he knew that he'd met his match. This was the one gem that he wasn't able to befriend. Maybe he can't make everyone happy. "Fine," Stephen sighed, giving in. "If that'll fulfill you more than what I've got, I don't want to hold you back." Before he could even raise his paw, Bismuth stepped forwards, holding his spiky shoulder to stop him. "Wait, Stephen, you don't have to let her go. If she's not going to go good, she should live out her punishment for what she did to you." Stephen winced. He already knew that. Bismuth turned to the tiny fairy blue gem, who appeared even more minuscule underneath the massive burly gem's shadow. "You don't have any power here," Bismuth growled. "Yes, I do." Aquamarine puffed up her chest, her mischievous smirk the clear originator of Bluebirds. "What makes you say that?" Bismuth's hands morphed into a threateningly heavy hammerhead. "Because Stephen won't leave me in here. That's not an option for him," Aquamarine replied easily, the truth of her words weighing like a whole mountain on top of him. Sometimes it scared Stephen how well she knew him. So, a slave to his own mercy again, Stephen pressed his paw into her cell's panel and sent the signal to let the force field down. The yellow sheen of light fell away, and she was free. Aquamarine stalked out of her cell, triumphant. The little fairy blue gem stood before him, scowling and hateful. He thought, for a few seconds, that maybe she'd change her mind. But Aquamarine only mocked him with, "May we never meet again," and stuck her tongue out. Her little water-composed butterfly wings popped out of her back, flapping into a buzzing blur to take off. She kicked off of the metal floor and flew out the open door, aiming to exit the castle so she could leave Homeworld forever. He watched her tiny, fluttering figure disappear around the corner, not looking back. That was the last time he ever saw Aquamarine.